Hello everyone, Grandpa Ron here again with the next in our beginner Bible study series. Just a reminder that this is very basic, and although I will throw in from time to time some references deeper in the Bible that will shed light on what we're reading, but the goal here is to just do a basic introductory study, and we're starting with Genesis. We've done chapters 1 through 6, so today we're going to talk about chapter 7. Last time we talked about how Noah was faithful and obedient to God in building an ark, basically a boat that was capable of floating, and we're going to find out for quite a long time. It took him a long time to build it, and during that time I'm sure that Noah told people why he was building it, and we can be sure he was ridiculed for it because there had never been any rain on the earth up until that time. Prior to that, the earth was watered by a mist and springs, and it's more like a terrarium environment. So people were skeptical and probably made fun of him. But Noah was faithful, built this huge ark according to the plans God gave him. And now we're going to see what happens initially. So let's start with chapter 7, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time." Now we know that Noah was sinful, because once man sinned in the Garden of Eden, he was no longer totally righteous. But because Noah was seeking the Lord and loved the Lord and agrees with the Lord that God is right and man is wrong, God has counted that as righteousness for him. And it appears that he's one of the only one on the earth to have that state of mind at this time. The earth had degenerated to the point where every thought of mankind was on evil continually, as we learned in the previous chapter. So he's telling them to get in the ark. And he says in verse 2, "You shall take with you of every clean animal by sevens, a male and his female, and of the animals that are not clean, 2, a male and his female. Also the birds of the sky by sevens, male and female, to keep offspring alive on the face of all the earth." A couple of comments on this. The distinction between clean and unclean animals is a distinction between animals that God would accept as a sacrifice and those that he would not accept as a sacrifice. And if you want to see a list of those animals, you can go to Hebrews 11, and it gives a detailed list of the difference between a clean and unclean animal. And, Moses in later chapters in Exodus actually formalizes the rules, provides guidance about sacrifices, but it's clear that Noah and his family already knew about sacrifices. And ever since Adam and Eve, we saw earlier that they were making sacrifices and offerings to the Lord. So they knew about it, even though we don't see any scriptures now concerning any guidance and rules they had to follow about sacrifices. But they had to have had some guidance in this. The other thing worth mentioning is previously Noah was instructed to put the animals on the ark by twos. Now there's a little bit of elaboration on this, and it's not just one pair, but multiple pairs of some of the animals. So of the clean animals, they're going to have 7 pair. Now some people would argue that This means 6 pairs plus 1 when it says by sevens. I kind of think it means 7 pairs, but either way, it doesn't matter to us. There's going to be more clean animals than unclean on the ark. And this includes the birds of the sky. So there's going to be a lot of animals on the ark. The thing about the ark is it was just the right size. It was big enough, not too big, but fully capable of holding the number of animals that can be calculated based on what the Lord God told him to bring. So he also had to have food on there, and he had to have food and lodging for his family. So everything was just right. God had designed it, Noah had been faithful and built it, and now they're loading up. Verse 4, for after 7 more days I will send rain on the earth. I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made. And Noah did according to all the Lord had commanded him. So the only ones that are going to survive this is going to be those that are in the ark. Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood of water came upon the earth. Then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground, there went into ark to Noah by 2, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came about after the 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth. Yeah. So even though Noah's pretty old right here, we're going to see that he lives quite a bit longer. But what a thing to go through. First rain that men had seen. And the earth is now going to go through a dramatic upheavals. And it's going to change very dramatically from what God originally created back in Genesis 1. And we're going to see why. So in verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. And the rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Notice that it says the fountains of the great deep burst open. Even now, there's huge volumes of water underground. And I don't just mean groundwater, but there are huge aquifers spread out around the world that contain huge amounts of water. There was a huge aquifer that we had in Yuma, Arizona. You had to go down over 1,000 feet. So this was not groundwater. And that aquifer spread out over huge, a vast area of land, all the way down into Mexico. And farmers were permitted to pump that water for irrigation. But unlike groundwater that's replenished by rain now, those aquifers takes huge, vast amounts of time to replenish. So there's strict rules on the use of them. But back then, in Noah's day, there was even more of these aquifers. And so it says the fountains of the great deep burst open. A lot of people feel that this is where the different continents came from, because you had big seismic upheavals. The earth started to split apart. And over this period of time that Noah and his family's in the ark, which we're going to find out in the next chapter, is over a year. dramatic things happened on the earth. Mountains, much taller mountains than existed before, were created. Huge cracks in the earth, a lot of volcanic activity. And so the earth is going to go through this dramatic upheaval during this flood. And we often talk about the flood, but if we look at other verses in the Bible and even this verse, we'll see that it's more than a flood. The flood is what wipes out the inhabitants, but the whole face of the earth is going to be transformed. And we'll go to verse 13. On the very same day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth and the sons of Noah and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, and all sorts of birds. So they went into the ark to Noah. Again, remember, God had programmed these animals to report, as you will, to Noah, and by twos of all flesh, in which was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, entered as God had commanded him, and the Lord closed it behind him. Then the flood came upon the earth 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark so that it rose above the earth. Remember, all the ark had to do was float. It had no propulsion. It didn't have to be aerodynamic, or however you apply that to a ship. It just had to float. Verse 18, and the water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. And the water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. I'm not sure there were any high mountains before the flood. The earth was more of a terrarium. I think there were probably changes in elevation, rolling hills, maybe some short mountains. But I personally, this is just my opinion now, based upon what I've read from scientists and things, that these high mountains they're talking about here actually were created during the flood, the great seismic activity, and there's some verses in Psalm I'd like to read. Let me find it. This is Psalm 104, and I'm going to start at verse 6. Thou didst cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters were standing above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled, and at the sound of thy thunder they hurried away. The mountains rose, and the valleys sank down to the place which thou didst establish for them. Thou didst set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth. So, as the floodwaters grew and grew and grew, and remember it's a combination of rain or the collapse of this vapor canopy around the earth and the groundwaters that were stored in the great deep. As the water got deeper and deeper, the sheer weight of the water pushed down in some areas. And as the water pushed those softer areas down, just like you'd put your thumb in a piece of clay, you push your thumb in there and it goes down. Around it, it rises up. The mountains rose up. And we learned that in high school even, or grammar school, that the mountains were pushed up by seismic activity. However, in school they attribute that to millions and millions and millions of years. The Bible account is it happened quickly, very quickly. And within that more or less year period, maybe a little longer. And that's why it's easy to see how fossils and all that kind of stuff could be formed, could be found up in the highest mountains and then down in the depressions as well, because fossils are formed when they're covered rapidly and deprived of oxygen, and they're entombed there in that material, and that's what happened. They were quickly buried, quickly covered up. Plus, it also said that at God's rebuke, the waters rushed away. So it didn't take millions of years for the water to go down. When the rain stopped, when the seismic activity stopped, all those waters rushed down into those low areas, carving out valleys and moving huge amounts of material. So there was a lot going on, and it changed the whole face of the earth. Let's go on to verse 19. And the water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. Oddly enough, I think this was providential, because based on the size of the ark, covering the highest mountain in 15 cubits meant that the ark would be able to float across anywhere in the world without hitting a mountain. We'd just be able to clear it. And verse 21, and all flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind. All of that was on the dry land. Of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, was the breath of the Spirit of life, died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left, together with those that were with him in the ark. And the water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So, after the flood, the water covered the earth for 150 days. Now we're going to see it starts to recede rapidly, as we read in Psalm. But it's still going to take, and I'll just jump ahead to next chapter, it's still going to take a little over a year for the water to go down to a point where there was any dry land and Noah could actually leave the ark. But man, what an unbelievable event. The whole earth being transformed by these huge amounts of water. The seismic activity, the weight of the water, the speed of water rushing down these mountains. And a lot of geologists today are realizing that the notion that it took millions and billions of years for this to occur, they're really questioning that now. And a lot actually believe that it took a cataclysmic event like this to shape the world to what it is today. And the more they discover, the greater trust they can put in God's written word. Yeah. Anyway, I hope this has been interesting to you. And we will go on to chapter 8 and see what happens when the water starts to recede, and talk about that next time. Thanks for watching. God bless. We'll see you.